Now we are going to discuss rectum and anal canal. So first we are going to discuss the anatomy. See the important points related to anatomy. So the normal length of rectum is 12 to 18 centimeter, but on an average, what is the length? On an average, the length is 14 centimeters. So first important point, what's the normal length of rectum? The normal length of rectum on an average, it's 14 centimeter. Then you must be knowing that there is one angle between rectum and anal canal, and that is known as anorectal angle. So what is the normal anorectal angle? It is 120 degree. So what's the normal anorectal angle? And the normal anorectal angle, this is 120 degree. Clear? Now here you can see the semicircular folds on the luminal aspect of rectum, and these semicircular folds are known as Houston valves. So what's the name of these semicircular folds? These are known as Houston valves. Okay, so these are present over the luminal aspect, Houston valves. After that, you can see that there are two fascia named fascia in relation to rectum. If you see anteriorly, this fascia is going to separate what? Prostate in males and vagina in females from rectum. So can you see, this is the fascia, this green colored fascia. Okay, so what's the name? This is known as Dinovilliers fascia. What is the other name of this fascia? The other name of this fascia is rectogenital fascia. Why? Because it is going to separate prostate and vagina from rectum. So what is the name? Rectogenital fascia. So the other name of this Dinovilliers fascia, this is known as rectogenital fascia. Simple. Now if you come posteriorly, there is one fascia which is going to separate rectum from sacrum and lower two sacral vertebrae. Can you see? These are the two lower sacral vertebrae, and this is the sacrum. And here you can see the fascia which is separating rectum from sacrum and lower two sacral vertebrae. So what is the name? So this is rectosacral fascia separating rectum from sacrum. And what is the other name of this fascia? This is also known as Waldeus fascia. So what's the name of this rectosacral fascia? This is known as Waldeus fascia. Now what is the importance of this Waldeus fascia and Dinovilliers fascia? That these are the two barriers for malignant invasion. The patients who are having carcinoma rectum, these are the barriers for malignant invasion, and it is going to form anatomical envelope for total mesorectal excision. What is this total mesorectal excision? We will discuss this in detail when I will discuss carcinoma rectum. Total mesorectal excision is done to achieve complete oncological clearance. Total mesorectal excision, it is done to achieve complete oncological clearance in patients of carcinoma rectum. Clear? So these are the two important fascia. One is Waldeus, which is also known as rectosacral fascia, and second is Dinovilliers, which is also known as rectogenital fascia. Now see the blood supply and lymphatic drainage. So the arteries which are going to supply the rectum is superior rectal, middle rectal and inferior rectal artery, and corresponding to these arteries there are veins. So what is the blood supply of rectum? It is superior rectal vessels, middle rectal vessels and inferior rectal vessels. Clear? So here you can see that this is the superior rectal vessels along with lymphatics, and here you can see middle rectal vessels, and this is the inferior rectal vessels. Clear? This superior rectal artery is a branch of inferior mesenteric artery. So these are the vessels. Now what is the main artery which supplies the rectum? Superior rectal artery is the main arterial supply. This is the main arterial supply of rectum. One important point. And second, you can see from this image that the lymphatic drainage is going to follow the arterial supply. Okay, so the vascular supply, so the lymphatic drainage is going to follow the vascular supply. And if you notice here, you can see that most of the lymphatic drainage is going to follow what? The superior rectal vessels. Clear? So it's mainly along the superior rectal vessels, right? And ultimately it is going to follow this superior rectal vessels, and ultimately it is going to para-aortic nodes. Okay, so see the lymphatic drainage. So lymphatic drainage of rectum, it follows the vascular supply and it's mainly upwards. So this is, you can see here, it is mainly upwards towards the superior rectal vessels. Clear? And drainage ultimately goes to para-aortic nodes. So here it is going to para-aortic nodes. Clear? So these are important points related to anatomy. And if you can see here, can you see? So from anal canal, if you notice, the lymphatic drainage goes to inguinal lymph nodes. That's why we will discuss that in carcinoma anal canal, there is involvement of which lymph nodes? Inguinal. So these are the important points related to rectum and anal canal. Respective anatomy will be also discussed in the topics. Now we are going to discuss very important topic, hemorrhoids. Hemorrhoids, and you know, hemorrhoids are most common cause of lower GI bleeding. Clear? You know that this is normal anatomical cushions. Hemorrhoids are normal anatomical cushions. And what is the function? It helps in defecation. So these are normal anatomical cushions. Okay. What are the composition? What's the composition? So hemorrhoids, these are composed of, the mnemonic is vas. The composition of these cushions, there are four components mainly. V means venules, A arterioles, S means smooth muscle fibers, and E elastic tissues. Okay, so what are the components? Venules, arterioles, there is smooth muscle fibers and elastic tissues. Smooth muscle fibers and elastic tissues. Clear? What's the number of these cushions? There are 3 hemorrhoids or 3 normal anatomical cushions. And what is their location? If we are going to examine the patient in lithotomy position, see the location. So here you can see there are 3 cushions, one located at 3 o'clock, another at 7 o'clock, and another at 11 o'clock. So 3 o'clock, 7 o'clock, 11 o'clock position. So here you can see. So if you see the 3 o'clock position, it is also known as left lateral, and the 7 is on right side, so it is right posterior, and 11 is right anterior. So this is left lateral. At 7 o'clock it is right posterior, and at 11 o'clock this is right anterior. So in this image you can see, here you can see that this is the left lateral at 3 o'clock. Here you can see this is at 7 o'clock, and here you can see this one is at 11 o'clock. Clear? So these are 3 in number. Now what is the problem? Generally these people have constipation, means they have hard fecal matter, they are going to pass hard fecal matter. And when a patient is having constipation, this patient is going to strain badly during defecation. So when patient is straining, because of that excessive straining, these anatomical cushions, in these anatomical cushions there is descent. So they come down, and because of that what happens? The hard fecal matter is going to injure these cushions, and because of that there is bleeding PR. So what kind of bleeding is there? There is painless bleeding. Clear? So see what is the problem here. The pathophysiology of hemorrhoids. Pathophysiology. So these patients have constipation, and because of constipation these patients strain. So there is straining. Because of that there is abnormal descent of cushions. So there is abnormal descent of cushions, and these cushions are injured by hard fecal matter. So there is injury by hard fecal matter. Okay, and because of this injury by hard fecal matter, what kind of bleeding? There is painless bleeding. Painless bleeding, PR. Clear? So this is the most common presentation. Apart from this bleeding, what else is there? Sometimes there is mucus discharge, and when patient is going to strain badly, there is prolapse also. Now see, the important points related to lower GI bleeding. What is the most common cause of lower GI bleeding we discussed? It is hemorrhoids. What is the most common cause of significant lower GI bleeding? It is colonic diverticula. And what is the most common cause of occult or obscure lower GI bleeding? And that's angiodysplasia, also known as vascular ectasia. Clear? So here you can see what are the clinical features of hemorrhoids. So there is painless bleeding. How much is the amount of bleeding? On an average, it is 3 to 5 ml. And patient is going to tell you, sir, I go for defecation. When I pass fecal matter, at the end, there is passage of 2 to 3 or 5 ml of fresh blood. And there is no pain. Clear? So generally, it is going to occur after defecation. Other symptoms, these patients complain of mucus discharge also. Clear? And what else? There is prolapse. Okay, now imagine this patient is coming to your OPD. What you do? So whenever a patient gives history of bleeding PR, we have to perform the digital rectal examination. So in this patient also, we will perform digital rectal examination. So first, very important point. What? Hemorrhoids are palpable or non-palpable? So these are non-palpable, right? So if hemorrhoids are non-palpable, obviously you cannot make the diagnosis on digital rectal examination. So that's why you have to visualize the hemorrhoids and you have to perform proctoscopy. So how you make the diagnosis of hemorrhoids? By proctoscopy. So how we make the diagnosis? We have to perform the digital rectal examination, and you have to remember that hemorrhoids are non-palpable. Hemorrhoids, these are non-palpable. Okay, that's why for diagnosis, what is required? Proctoscopy. So diagnosis, it is made by proctoscopy. Diagnosis is made by proctoscopy. Clear? Now, the management depends whether the patient is having internal hemorrhoid or external hemorrhoid. So, what is the definition? Internal and external. See? Now, see the anatomy. Here you can see that this is the dentate line. It is also known as pectinate line. So, what's the name? This is dentate line, also known as pectinate line. And what is the location of dentate line from anal verge? It is located 2 cm above anal verge. Okay, above dentate line there is pain insensitive region, and below dentate line there is pain sensitive region. Okay, so if the hemorrhoid is located internal to dentate line, it is known as internal hemorrhoid, and if hemorrhoid is located external to dentate line, it is known as external. So here you can see this is the internal hemorrhoid located internal to dentate line, and here this is external hemorrhoid, it is located external to dentate line. Internal hemorrhoid is located in pain insensitive region, and that's why there is painless bleeding, and in external hemorrhoid there is pain. Clear? So see the differences between internal and external hemorrhoid. So here you can notice differences between internal and external hemorrhoid. Clear? So internal hemorrhoid, what's the location? It is located above dentate line. So it is located in pain insensitive region. Simple. And if it's located in pain insensitive region, and that's why you can see that there is painless bleeding. So that's why there is painless bleeding. Simple. So external, you noticed that it is located below dentate line. Clear? And it is located in pain sensitive region. Pain sensitive region. Okay, there was one liner question related to external hemorrhoid. That external hemorrhoid is also known as 5 days painful self-curing lesion. So whenever there is pain in hemorrhoid, if nothing is done, then also in 5 days pain disappears. So what is the other name? You have to remember, it is also known as 5 days painful self-curing lesion. So 5 days painful self-curing lesion. Okay, now see the problem. Sometimes in external hemorrhoid there is recurrent thrombosis. So if there is recurrent thrombosis in this external hemorrhoid, it appears like there are areas of red, black. So there are red, black areas in the external hemorrhoid, and that's why because of recurrent thrombosis the appearance is like semi-ripe black currant. We discussed red currant jelly, if you remember. We discussed red currant jelly in intussusception when the stool was mixed with blood, and here there is semi-ripe black currant appearance. Why? Because of recurrent thrombosis. So the appearance is like semi-ripe black currant. Clear? And why this kind of appearance? It's because of recurrent thrombosis. So whenever there is recurrent thrombosis, okay. Now see, these patients are coming to our emergency and these patients have severe pain. So whenever these patients are coming to our emergency because of thrombosis, because of severe pain, what we have to go for? We have to excise the external hemorrhoid. So generally what is done? We are supposed to excise the external hemorrhoid. Clear? So what is the treatment? It is excision. And how we treat internal hemorrhoid? The treatment of internal hemorrhoid is dependent on the degree. Okay? Means on the basis of its classification. So see, this external hemorrhoids, and what's the treatment? It is excision. And the treatment of internal hemorrhoid, it depends on the degree. So first you have to understand what's the classification of internal hemorrhoid. So if you see this first degree hemorrhoid, in this case there is only bleeding, there is no prolapse. In second degree, what is the problem? Whenever this patient is going for defecation and patient is going to strain, so there is prolapse during defecation, and after defecation it goes inside spontaneously. So in second degree there is bleeding PR plus prolapse during defecation. In third degree, whenever there is prolapse, it requires manual reposition. So patient is going to use the fingers to put it inside. And what happens in fourth degree? You can see in fourth degree there is permanent prolapse. Okay. So what happens in this first degree? In the first degree there is bleeding PR, only bleeding PR. Clear? In second degree there is bleeding PR plus prolapse during defecation. And it goes inside spontaneously after defecation. In grade 3 there is bleeding PR plus prolapse, and this prolapse requires manual reposition. Prolapse requires manual reposition. Okay, so there is prolapse with manual reposition, and in fourth degree there is bleeding PR plus permanent prolapse. So there is bleeding PR plus permanent prolapse. Okay, so if you understand the pathophysiology, what was the basic problem? Constipation, and this patient was straining badly. So what we have to treat? First, try to treat the constipation. So we are going to advise sitz bath, we are going to advise stool softeners, we are going to advise high fiber diets. So for lower degree, means for first degree, sometimes this is sufficient. So the management is dependent on the degree. Okay, so see how we are going to manage. Management of internal hemorrhoids. Patient who is having first degree hemorrhoids, here usually conservative management. So we are going to advise sitz bath for relaxation. We are advising high fiber diet, and stool softeners. Simple. Now imagine if there is no improvement even after this kind of conservative management. So first degree, second degree, and for selected patients of third degree, what we go for, there are two treatment options which are cheap and highly effective. One is known as banding and the second is known as sclerotherapy. So see, for the patients of first degree, second degree and selected patients of third degree, in this group, there are two treatment options which are cheap and highly effective. One is known as rubber band ligation or banding, and the second is sclerotherapy. Sclerotherapy. Clear? Now see how we are doing the banding and sclerotherapy. It is so easy, banding is so easy that even after 15 days of posting in internship, interns are doing the banding in minor OT. How we do it? Have a look. So in this picture, you can see that this is the internal hemorrhoid and this is the ligator. With the help of this ligator, I am going to apply these rubber bands near the base or near the pedicle. So what happens, can you see, these are the rubber bands and we are going to fire the rubber bands. So finally what happens, these rubber bands are being applied at the pedicle and what will happen, suppose this is the hemorrhoid and if you are going to apply the rubber band, its vascularity is gone and within 48 hours it is sloughed off. So what will happen, within 48 hours it is sloughed off because its vascularity is gone, and when it is sloughed off, healing occurs by fibrosis. So healing occurs by fibrosis. In one sitting, maximum we are applying the rubber bands for 2 hemorrhoids. Clear? And within 48 hours it is going to be sloughed off. This is one treatment option. What is the second treatment option? We are going to inject the sclerotherapy around the hemorrhoid. And because of injection of sclerotherapy, means sclerosing agent, there is sclerosis or fibrosis. So how we do it? Have a look. So in this picture you can see that sclerosing agent is being injected around the hemorrhoid. Clear? And what is that preferred sclerosing agent? We are using 5% phenol in almond oil. So 5% phenol in almond oil. This is used and there is sclerosis and fibrosis. And here you can see we are going to apply what? The rubber band, and it will be sloughed off within 48 hours. So this treatment is so easy that you have seen the ads of piles everywhere. Whenever you are traveling by bus or by train, you have seen on the glass window there is yellow colored pamphlet having some kind of ad written as Piles Clinic. Without surgery, complete eradication of pile. Single injection, complete eradication. So what is that single injection going to eradicate the piles? Sclerotherapy. Without surgery, complete eradication, what? Banding. But what is the problem? See, the hemorrhoids in which there is prolapse, and if there is prolapse, generally in these cases we have to go for excision of that prolapsed hemorrhoid. Means whenever there is prolapse, we have to go for excision, and excision of hemorrhoid is known as hemorrhoidectomy. That's why in selected patients of third degree and in fourth degree patients we go for hemorrhoidectomy. So what's the treatment in selected patients of third degree? Selected patients of third degree and fourth degree patients. In these cases, we go for hemorrhoidectomy. Hemorrhoidectomy, clear? And many times this question was asked that what are the names of hemorrhoidectomy? Clear? So see the names of hemorrhoidectomy. First, there is Milligan-Morgan. The name is Milligan-Morgan. Open hemorrhoidectomy. Okay. Second is Ferguson. Closed hemorrhoidectomy. Ferguson. Closed hemorrhoidectomy. Third is Whitefield submucosal hemorrhoidectomy. And the fourth is Longo's Stapler hemorrhoidectomy. So third is Whitefield submucosal hemorrhoidectomy. And the fourth is Longo's Stapler hemorrhoidectomy. It's the Longo's Stapler hemorrhoidectomy. Okay. Now see, nowadays these two are not done. Ferguson closed and Whitefield submucosal hemorrhoidectomy is not done. So we are doing Milligan-Morgan and Longo's Stapler hemorrhoidectomy. Now see, after hemorrhoidectomy, what's the most common complication? It's the pain. And because of this pain, there is urinary retention. Because of pain, there is urinary retention. So out of Milligan-Morgan open hemorrhoidectomy and Longo's stapler hemorrhoidectomy, which one is having lesser pain? Obviously, Longo's stapler hemorrhoidectomy. So which one is preferred? It's the Longo's stapler hemorrhoidectomy. Clear? So Longo's stapler hemorrhoidectomy. This is preferred because of lesser post-operative pain. So this is preferred. Why? Because of lesser pain. Simple. So question, what's the most common complication? The most common complication, it's the pain followed by urinary retention. It's the pain followed by urinary retention. Okay, in most of the questions this option is not there. What? Pain is not there. So if pain is not there, what you will mark? Urinary retention. And if it's there, you will mark what? Pain. Now see the images and tell me the diagnosis. So here you can see there is prolapse of rectum. So this is rectal prolapse. If you see the first picture, in the first picture there is prolapse of only mucosa. So if there is prolapse of only mucosa, it is known as mucosal prolapse. And whenever there is prolapse of all the three layers, mucosa, submucosa, muscularis, when the whole thickness is coming out, this is known as full thickness prolapse. So second picture is of full thickness prolapse. Clear? First is only mucosa is being prolapsed. So this is mucosal prolapse. Now see, this mucosal prolapse is more common in children, whereas in adults there is full thickness prolapse. Now see the anatomy. Now see, in certain patients there is redundant rectum. Now see, this is anal canal and this is rectum. So whenever there is redundant rectum and there is weakness of pelvic floor muscles, what happens? First, this rectum goes inside the anal canal. Now can you see the movement? Anal canal, this is rectum, it goes inside. So before prolapse, what is this? You can see one loop is going into another, or one part of bowel is going into another. This is intussusception. What kind of intussusception? This is internal intussusception. Clear? So see, there is internal intussusception. Okay. Now, whenever this rectum is going in anal canal, and when you can visualize this coming out, this is known as prolapse. So this is rectal prolapse. How we can manage? It's very easy. So since this rectum is mobile and redundant, what you can do, you can fix it. So where you can fix it? Posteriorly you can see there is sacrum posteriorly, and anteriorly what? There is rectum. So you can see this is the sacrum, this is the rectum. I'm using the mesh, can you see? And this mesh is sutured around this rectum and it is fixed to the sacrum. Clear? So if it is fixed to the sacrum with the help of mesh, so I'm doing the fixation of rectum with the help of mesh. This is known as rectopexy. So in rectal prolapse, I'm going to perform rectopexy. This is one treatment. If there is excessive length or extra length of rectum, you excise the extra length and then you fix it. If you excise and then you fix it, this is known as resection rectopexy. One. Second, in certain patients, whenever the patients who cannot tolerate this long duration surgery, so in those cases, can you see this is anal canal? So what we can go for? We can go for anal wiring. So we are going to narrow this anal canal with the help of, so if the patient is having some kind of disease who cannot tolerate the surgery, in those cases we can go for anal wiring. So there is narrowing of anal canal and now this rectum will not go. So this is the basic treatment and the basic pathophysiology involved in rectal prolapse. So one by one we are going to discuss. First we are going to discuss the rectal prolapse in children and then in adults. So rectal prolapse in children. Rectal prolapse in children, and we discussed it is mucosal prolapse. So this is the mucosal prolapse. If you go to the rural area, you will notice that at the time of defecation, some of the patients are having this kind of presentation. Why? These kids are suffering from protein energy malnutrition. And when these patients are having protein energy malnutrition, what is the problem? They have habit of eating soil, that is known as pica. Since they have habit of eating soil, because of this what happens? There is worm infestation. And when these patients have worm infestation and because of eating the soil, they have diarrhea. So three factors: protein, energy, malnutrition, worm infestation, and diarrhea. In all these cases, when the child is going for defecation, doing straining, there is prolapse of only mucosa. Good thing, if you treat the underlying cause, this condition resolves spontaneously. So what are the risk factors or causes of rectal prolapse in children? First, protein, energy, malnutrition. There is worm infestation, and diarrhea. Okay. Now see, certain patients have sacral agenesis, so there is no support to the rectum, and certain patients have myelomeningocele. In these cases also there is rectal prolapse, but these are rare causes. So other causes are sacral agenesis and meningomyelocele. How we are going to manage? In majority of cases, what conservative management is sufficient. So if it's because of protein, energy, malnutrition, worm infestation, diarrhea, what? Treat the underlying cause. So treat the underlying cause, and most patients improve. Now imagine if still it persists. Even after treating the underlying cause, it is going to persist. In that case, we have to go for rectopexy, means fixation of rectum. And what's the name of rectopexy? We have to perform Lockhart. This is Lockhart-Mumry rectopexy. So this is known as Lockhart-Mumry rectopexy. Okay. Now see, these patients, the patients who are having sacral agenesis or meningomyelocele, here the prognosis is poor and patient cannot tolerate a long duration surgery. So here we go for Thiersch anal wiring. So in these patients, in children, we go for Thiersch anal wiring. Now see, the rectal prolapse in adults, we discussed that in adults it is full thickness. It is the full thickness rectal prolapse. Okay, so how we are going to treat the rectal prolapse in adults? Generally we go for rectopexy, and there are two approaches. One is abdominal and the second is perineal. What is the advantage of this abdominal approach? That here you can perform the extensive surgery and good fixation. If there is extra length of rectum, it can be resected. So what? If rectopexy is done by abdominal approach, here the recurrence rate is lesser in comparison to perineal approach. But what is the disadvantage? Since it's an extensive surgery, here the morbidity is very high. So suppose I have to select two patients. One, the patient is 40 years old, and the second, the patient who is more than 60 years old. So the 40 years old patient, in this patient I don't want recurrence. That's why I will go for abdominal rectopexy. And in the patient who is more than 60 or elderly patient, in that I don't want any kind of morbidity, so I will go for perineal approach. So see, in adults, rectopexy can be performed by abdominal approach, or it can perform by perineal approach. Clear? In abdominal approach, what is the advantage? That it is having low recurrence rate. But what is the disadvantage? It's having high morbidity. In perineal approach, there is high recurrence rate, but advantage, there is low morbidity. Clear? And that's why abdominal approach is preferred in young patients, and this one is preferred in elderly. Clear? Now how to remember? There are named surgeries which are asked. So the mnemonic is VAR. Here it's VAR. W means Wells, A means this is abdominal, R means Ripstein. So mnemonic is VAR, Wells, abdominal, Ripstein. And in perineal approach, the mnemonic is PAD. Clear? So P means perineal, A means Altmeier's, D means Delorme. So A, it's Altmeier's, and D means it's Delorme. Clear? So PAD var P perineal Altmeier's Delorme, var Wells abdominal Ripstein. These are the rectopexy. Then there is a surgery in which we perform the resection of rectum and then we perform the fixation. That's known as resection rectopexy, also known as Goldberg-Frickmann. Now these are the types of rectopexy. There is another technique in which we perform the resection and then perform the fixation. So that's known as resection rectopexy. Clear? And what's the name of this surgery? It's known as Goldman-Freiberg. So this is Goldman-Freiberg rectopexy. Goldman-Freiberg rectopexy. Clear? So these are the names which are asked frequently in the exam. They are asking Wells, Ripstein, Altmeier's, Delorme. We discussed Thiersch anal wiring. So you tell me, Thiersch anal wiring should be included in which one? Abdominal or perineal? So obviously Thiersch is also included where? In the perineal. So this is Thiersch anal wiring. Clear? So this is how we manage the rectal prolapse in adults. Now we are going to discuss anorectal abscess. Anorectal abscess, very important topic. So first question, what is the most common organism responsible for anorectal abscess? And the most common organism responsible is E. coli, followed by Bacteroides fragilis. Okay, so first important point, the most common organism responsible, this is E. coli, followed by Bacteroides fragilis. Okay, now see what are the types of anorectal abscess. So the most common type is perianal and the second most common type is ischiorectal. So here you can see perianal. In this perianal, the subcutaneous type, this is the most common. What is the second most common type? Here you can see ischiorectal. So this is the second most common type. Other types are intersphincteric. There is supralevator. This supralevator is also known as pelvirectal. This is also known as pelvirectal. Okay, so see what are the types. We are going to discuss the types in decreasing frequency. So the types in descending order or decreasing frequency. Most common type is perianal, and if a subtype is asked, which one? Subcutaneous. So this is the most common type. The second most common type is ischiorectal. Ischiorectal. The third is intersphincteric. Intersphincteric. Fourth is supralevator. Supralevator is also known as pelvirectal. So supralevator, it is also known as pelvirectal. And the fifth is submucous or submucosal. Okay, so these are the types. Now see how anorectal abscess is going to form in any patient. See the pathophysiology. Now see, this is the normal anatomy. What are the important points which you have to remember? You can see that this is the dentate line, which is also known as pectinate line. So dentate line and or pectinate line. Now see, there is anal gland and anal crypt. Okay, so see, this is having one opening. This is known as anal crypt, and this is also known as crypt of Morgagni. Okay, sometimes what's the problem? Sometimes, can you see, the infection via this crypt enters into the gland, and when infection enters into the gland via crypt, so there is formation of what? Pus collection or abscess. And what? This pus is going to follow the path of least resistance. So what's going to happen? The pus is going to collect here. So where? In the perianal region. So this is what? The pathophysiology of anorectal abscess. So this is the pathophysiology of anorectal abscess. So what happens? Infection enters from crypt goes to the gland. So what is the name of this theory? The name of this theory is cryptoglandular theory. So what's the name of this theory? This is known as cryptoglandular theory. Clear? So see, this is known as cryptoglandular theory. And this cryptoglandular theory is responsible for formation of anorectal abscess. Now the problem, sometimes these patients are not coming to us, means to the clinicians, and what happens, sometimes this abscess is going to rupture outside. So if abscess ruptures outside, there is formation of a tract between perineal skin and anorectum. So what happens, there is formation of fistula in ano, and for fistula in ano also, which theory is responsible? Cryptoglandular theory. So you can understand that what is the most common condition associated with fistula in ano? It is the anorectal abscess. Clear? So it's the cryptoglandular theory which is responsible for formation of what? Anorectal abscess. Simple. And this anorectal abscess, if not treated properly, it can convert into fistula in ano. So that's why for fistula in ano also, which theory is responsible? Cryptoglandular theory. And which condition is most commonly associated with fistula in ano? It is the anorectal abscess. Now see, what is the problem? There is pus collection. Clear? So can you see, this patient is having anorectal abscess. What is the exact location? Perianal. These patients have severe pain in the perianal region. Simultaneously, there is throbbing swelling. And since pus collection is there, this patient is having swinging pyrexia. Okay, so what are the clinical features of anorectal abscess? First, these patients have severe pain in perianal region. There is throbbing swelling, and there is fever with chills and rigor or swinging pyrexia. Swinging pyrexia. Simple. We discussed that if pus collection is there in the body, it should be drained. So what is the treatment? It is incision and drainage with antibiotics. So here also we go for incision and drainage with antibiotics. But special type of incision is given. What is that special type of incision? You can see we give this kind of incision, and after giving this kind of incision, we have to cut the skin edges so that there is wide and free drainage. Why you want wide and free drainage? So that it should not close. Clear? So what is the name of this incision? So here you can see this is the shape. So this is cruciate shaped incision, right? So what's the treatment? Treatment is incision and drainage plus antibiotics. Simple. And what kind of incision we are giving? Cruciate shaped incision for wide and free drainage. Clear? Now the problem, whenever the patient is coming timely, we perform this kind of treatment. But if there is delay in the treatment, sometimes there is rupture of abscess outside and formation of abnormal tract between anorectum and perineal skin. And what's the name of this tract? This is known as fistula in ano. So here you can notice that this is the abscess and it's going to rupture outside. So there is formation of a tract. Clear? And this tract is known as fistula in ano. So we are going to discuss in detail fistula in ano. Okay, so in this case there is abnormal tract between anorectum and perineal skin. We discussed which theory is responsible for formation of fistula in ano, and this is cryptoglandular theory. Okay, we discussed what is the most commonly associated condition with fistula in ano, and the most commonly associated condition with fistula in ano, and that is anorectal abscess. These are basics. So there is anorectal abscess. This is the most commonly associated condition. Now it's very easy to understand. See, this is anorectum and this is the fistula. Clear? Fistula is of two types. It can be simple fistula or complex fistula. What is simple fistula? Here you can see there is single straight track. So if there is single straight track, it is simple fistula, and if there are multiple branched track, this is known as complex fistula. So first, what is simple fistula? Simple fistula, it's having single straight track. Simple, single straight track. Okay, and then there is complex fistula, and the complex fistula is having multiple branched track. Multiple branched track. Okay. After that, there is another definition: high-lying fistula and low-lying fistula. So this is in relation to one structure, and that's known as anorectal ring. It is in relation to anorectal ring. This was asked many times in exam in anatomy as well as in surgery. So first you should understand what are the three components of anorectal ring. So you can see here that this is the rectum, clear, and this is the anal canal. There is anorectal angle, and you know there is a muscle which forms a sling around this anorectum. So what's the name of this muscle which forms a sling? This muscle is attached to pubis. It is attached to pubis and forms a sling around anorectal angle. So this is puborectalis. Name of muscle puborectalis. The second component is internal anal sphincter, and the third component is external anal sphincter. Third component is external anal sphincter. Now see what is the difference between rectum and anal canal. In the rectum, in muscle layer, there is inner circular and outer longitudinal muscle layer. Whenever this is going into anal canal, there is transition. So what happens? The inner circular layer becomes internal anal sphincter, and the outer longitudinal layer becomes external anal sphincter. So what are the components of anorectal ring? Here you can see this is puborectalis, this is external anal sphincter, and this is internal anal sphincter. Clear? So these are the three components of anorectal ring. This is anorectal ring. And we discussed in anatomy how much is the anorectal angle. This anorectal angle is, the angle is 120 degree. Normal anorectal angle is 120 degree. So this is the anorectal ring. See, if there is fistula and the fistula is having internal opening above anorectal ring, this is high line. And if fistula is having internal opening below anorectal ring, this is low line. So what is high line fistula? Fistula with internal opening above anorectal ring, and fistula which is located, internal opening is located below anorectal ring, that is low line. So another definition, this is high line, and this is what? Low line. Okay, so high line fistula and low line. Now see what are the causes of fistula in ano. We discussed the most common association is with anorectal abscess. See the other causes. So the most common cause is anorectal abscess. Other causes are patient is having Crohn's disease. So you know in Crohn's disease patient also there are multiple anal fistula. In lymphogranuloma venereum also there is fistula. Actinomycosis, foreign body in rectum, malignancy, HIV, these are the other causes. So in all these cases you may find fistula. There is a classification system in relation to fistula in ano, and what's the name of that classification? It is the Parkes classification. So according to Parkes classification there are 4 types of fistula in ano. See the types. Now in this picture you can see this is the internal anal sphincter and this is external anal sphincter. So here you can see the tract is mainly passing between these two sphincters. So what's the name? Type 1 is known as intersphincteric. Type 1 is known as intersphincteric. Clear? Now see, type 2, here it is going to cross both of the sphincters. So type 2 is, it is transsphincteric. Clear? Now here you can see this is the tract. So this is type 3 and type 3 is suprasphincteric, and you can see it is extrasphincteric, type 4. So type 4 is extrasphincteric. Okay, we discussed many times that generally in surgery, if the classification starts from 1 2 3 4 5, what is the most common type? Type 1. And if it starts from A B C D E, what is the most common type? Type A. So here, what is the most common type? It's the type 1. So the most common type is type 1. So how to remember? The mnemonic is it's extra. The mnemonic is it's extra. 1 2 3 4. So what is 1? I means intersphincteric, T means transsphincteric, S means suprasphincteric, extra means extrasphincteric. So these are the 4 types. Now see the presentation. Generally fistula in ano is more common in males and usually it is seen in 3rd to 5th decade. What is the presentation? These patients are coming to you and they tell you that, sir, I'm having external opening in the perianal region. So in the perianal region there is one external opening. What else they are going to tell you? That, sir, there is periodic seropurulent discharge. Means every 2 to 3 weeks sometimes there is serous discharge or seropurulent discharge. He will also give you the history that once there was infection leading to abscess. So if the tract is blocked or obstructed, infection can lead to abscess formation. And special feature, see, this is the rectum and this is the anal canal. Sometimes the internal opening is located in the rectum. And if internal opening is located in the rectum, there will be one special history given by the patient. This patient will tell you that, sir, I pass feces and flatus from that external opening. So whenever patient gives this history, that patient passes feces and flatus from external opening, you should understand that the internal opening is in the rectum. Why? Rectum is the fecal reservoir. Clear? So if patient passes feces and flatus, it means the internal opening is in the rectum. In anal canal, fecal matter is not there. Whenever patient is going for defecation, then only fecal matter comes. Okay, so these are the special points. First, see the clinical features. It is more common in males and generally it is seen in 3rd to 5th decade. What is the presentation? Here you can see these patients have external opening in the perineal region, and from this external opening there is seropurulent discharge. Seropurulent discharge, right? Sometimes there is obstruction of the tract, and if there is infection, it can also lead to abscess. And if patient passes feces and flatus, passage of feces and flatus from the external opening suggests what? That internal opening is in the rectum. It suggests that internal opening is in the rectum. Now see, in patients of fistula in ano, what we are supposed to assess? So here, first we have to assess that what is the location of external opening and how many external openings are there. Second, where is the internal opening? What is the course of tract? Whether any secondary extension is there or not, and what is the complicated disease with which patient is suffering. So we perform examination and we go for investigations to assess these key points. So what are those key points which should be assessed in patients of fistula in ano? The key points which should be assessed in patient of fistula in ano. First, the location of internal opening. Location of internal opening. Second, location of external opening. What is the course of tract? Whether there are secondary extensions or not. So presence of secondary extensions. And complicating disease. Patient is suffering from any complicating disease. Okay, so After history, we have to perform the examination. So on inspection, you are going to see that external opening. We are supposed to perform the digital rectal examination. Now see, whenever we are going to perform the digital rectal examination, what you are going to feel around this internal opening, there is induration. So you can feel the induration around the internal opening. Sometimes beginners are not able to appreciate this induration. So what? You must be knowing what is the length of proctoscope, 10 centimeter. So if this internal opening is within 10 centimeter, you can perform the proctoscopy and you can visualize. Clear? So how we can localize this internal opening? We can localize this on digital rectal examination as well as proctoscopy. Clear? On digital rectal examination, there is induration and the length of proctoscope is 10 centimeter. So we can visualize the 10 centimeter if internal opening is there and we can localize it, right? But I told you that beginners are not able to appreciate the internal opening. So that's why Goodsall made the rule, and according to this rule, on the basis of external opening, we can easily localize the internal opening. So Goodsall's rule is used to indicate the likely position of internal opening on the basis of external opening. Okay, so see what is the Goodsall's rule. Now imagine that this is the anus and I'm going to divide this by an imaginary transverse line. So here you can see this is the anterior part and this is the posterior part. Clear? So anus is divided by an imaginary transverse line. It is said that anteriorly located external openings are joined by short straight tract. Can you see here? Short straight tract, and the posteriorly located external openings are joined by long curved tract. Clear? And generally posteriorly located external openings are joined by long curved tract, and it's going to open where? In the posterior midline. So at which o'clock position? 6 o'clock position. Now see, here this is the anteriorly located external opening. What is the location? It is located at 1 o'clock position. So if you see, the internal opening is also located at 1 o'clock position. Here it is located at 11 o'clock position. So here you can see the internal opening is also located at 11 o'clock position. Now here you see it is located at 8 o'clock position. Since it is posterior, here you see the internal opening is at 6 o'clock position. So I'm repeating, according to Goodsall's rule, anteriorly located external openings are joined by short straight tract. Posteriorly located external openings are joined by long curved tract, and it is going to open posteriorly in the midline. So the name of this rule is Goodsall's. This is Goodsall's rule. Clear? So question is expected that examiner is going to tell you that the location of external opening is at 4 o'clock. It's 4 o'clock. Clear? So if location is at 4 o'clock position, what is the location of internal opening? Yes, so if it is 4 o'clock here, obviously it's posterior. So internal opening at 6 o'clock position. If the external opening is located at 10 o'clock position, internal opening is also located at 10 o'clock position. But there are exceptions. So what are the exceptions? You can see the conditions in which this external opening is located more than 3 centimeter from anal verge. If external opening is located more than 3 centimeter from anal verge, or the cases in which there are multiple external openings, posterior rule will be applied. It means the internal opening will be at 6 o'clock position. See, so what are the exceptions of Goodsall's rule? Exceptions. So first, external opening located more than 3 centimeter from anal verge. Clear? And second, if patient is having multiple external openings. So if there are multiple external openings, okay, so these are exceptions. It means in both of these cases posterior rule will be applied. So where is the internal opening? It is posteriorly in the midline, and it is 6 o'clock. It is at 6 o'clock position. So this is Goodsall's rule. By the way, there are two questions which are asked. What is the first investigation done in patients of fistula? So in that fistula tract, we inject the dye and take X-ray. This is fistulogram. But there is a better investigation which is having very high sensitivity. It can detect all the tracts, and the investigation of choice is MRI. So how we are going to make the diagnosis? First investigation done in fistula in ano, and that's fistulogram. Fistula in ano, inject the dye, take X-ray, fistulogram. And what is the investigation of choice for diagnosis? Here it's the MRI. Now see how we are going to manage these patients. Imagine this is the patient and this is the fistula, okay, fistula tract. What we are going to do, if we are giving incision over the fistula tract, and you give incision over the fistula tract and you are going to open the tract, this is known as otomy. So what is this? Fistulotomy. And in second situation, suppose this is the fistula tract and you are going to excise the fistula tract. Can you see? I'm going to excise this is the tract and I'm going to excise the fistula tract. So this is fistulectomy. So fistulotomy and fistulectomy. Generally, these are not done nowadays because of increased morbidity. Clear? So what? Fistulotomy and fistulectomy. So the treatment options. What are the treatment options? Clear? First is fistulotomy. Second is fistulectomy. So fistulotomy, fistulectomy, we are not doing these commonly because of increased morbidity. Nowadays there is a popular treatment available and that's known as Seton. In the market it is available by the name of Charasutra. Seton we will discuss in detail. Seton. Fourth is WAFT. What is the full form of WAFT? This is video assisted anal fistula treatment. Full form, video assisted anal fistula treatment. Here with the help of miniature endoscope, what we do, we treat it. So that's why it's known as video assisted anal fistula treatment. And we can inject the glue inside the tract. So these are the treatment options. The most popular is this Seton. Clear? What are the types of Seton which are available? What is this Seton? Seton is a thread which can be made of silk, linen, elastic, or it could be a rubber band also. What are the types? It is of 4 types. First, cutting Seton. Second, non-cutting Seton. The other name of non-cutting Seton is draining Seton. It's draining Seton. There is marking Seton, and there is staging Seton. Okay, how we insert the Seton, how it looks like and how it works, see. So in this picture, can you see? We used a rubber band as a Seton for the fistula. So see the diagrammatic representation. This is the fistula and I inserted this yellow colored rubber band like this. And I took out both ends like this and then I'm going to tie the knot. So here you can see this is the final appearance and I'm going to tie a knot. See, whenever this Seton is loosely applied, if it's loosely applied, whatever the pus collection is there, this pus collection is coming out. So it acts as a drain. And whatever the pus collection is there, infection is there, it is easy for the pus to be drained out. So it is also known as draining Seton. So non-cutting Seton or draining Seton when it is used or it is applied loosely. And what is the problem? Every week, suppose I'm going to tighten the seton every week, so it will start cutting the soft tissue. So if you start tightening it, it will start cutting the soft tissue, and after some point of time, it reaches this place. So this is known as cutting seton. What is the advantage of cutting seton? If a patient is having high-lying fistula and you are using cutting seton, it is going to convert that high-lying fistula into low-lying fistula. What's the main problem with high-lying fistula? Since high-lying fistula is located above anorectal ring, anorectal ring is having important role in defecation. So if any structure is injured here, it leads to incontinence. So that's why for high-lying fistula, we go for cutting seton. It converts high-lying fistula into low-lying fistula. And the patients who are having multiple infected fistula, like HIV positive patient, Crohn's disease patients, in those cases we are using draining seton to control the infection. Clear? So what are the uses? We discussed the uses. Cutting seton. So it is used to converts high-lying fistula into low-lying fistula. Okay, and what's the use of this draining seton? Draining seton, it is used in patients who are having infected fistula, multiple infected fistula like Crohn's disease and HIV positive. So these patients have multiple infected fistula, and this is used to control the infection, to drain the abscess or pus collection. So this is how we manage the patients of fistula in ano. Now tell me, what is the diagnosis in this case? Can you see here? There is longitudinal split in the anoderm. This is anal verge and this is the dentate line. This is the anal verge and this is the dentate line. So what you can see, that there is longitudinal split in the anoderm, extend from anal verge till dentate line, and this is known as fissure in ano. So here you can see there is fissure in ano. Very, very important topic. So this is fissure in ano. Okay, and it is characterized by longitudinal split in the anoderm. So there is longitudinal split in anoderm. What is the extent? Here you can see the extent is from anal verge to dentate line. So the extent, it's from anal verge to dentate line. This question was asked in NEET PG. Extent from anal verge to dentate line. The question was asked that what's the location. So suppose this is a clock. Imagine it's a clock. This is 3 o'clock, 6 o'clock, 3, 6, 9 and 12 o'clock position. So what's the location? So here you can see it's located at 6 o'clock position. So it is located posteriorly in the midline or 6 o'clock position. So the location posteriorly in midline or 6 o'clock position, right? Fissure in ano is of two types. One is acute anal fissure and the second is chronic fissure. So acute fissure, chronic fissure. Chronic fissure is characterized by a triad. What's that triad? Have a look. So in this case, you can see what's the triad of this chronic anal fissure. These patients have cano-shaped ulcer. Can you see? The shape is like small boat. It is like small boat. So this is cano-shaped ulcer. Here you can see hypertrophied anal papilla and what? There is sentinel pile, also known as skin tag. So what are the components? It is characterized by a triad. There is cano-shaped ulcer. There is hypertrophied anal papilla. Hypertrophied anal papilla. And what else? These patients have skin tag or sentinel pile. So these patients have skin tag or sentinel pile. Now see the pathophysiology is very easy to understand. There are two problems in the patients of Fisher. First, they have spasm of internal anal sphincter. You know, there are two sphincters in anal canal, external anal sphincter and internal anal sphincter. External anal sphincter is voluntary. So when we go for defecation, we are going to relax the external anal sphincter. Internal anal sphincter is involuntary. So what's the first problem? These patients have spasm of internal anal sphincter. And second problem, these patients have constipation. Now see, patient is going for defecation, and when patient is going for defecation, patient is straining badly. So patient tries to force the fecal matter to go out, but what's the problem? This internal anal sphincter is having spasm. Because of this, what's the problem? This hard fecal matter is going to injure the pain sensitive mucosa of anal canal. And when this hard fecal matter tries to come out, there is severe pain during defecation. And what else? On this hard fecal matter, there is streaking of blood. So this is the problem. So what are the two problems? Spasm and constipation. So in the treatment also, you will notice that we are going to discuss going to manage this patient. How? First, we are going to manage the constipation and we are going to relax the spasm. So what's the pathophysiology here? These patients have spasm of internal anal sphincter and there is constipation. Clear? That's why during defecation, what's the problem? There is injury to pain sensitive mucosa of anal canal. Injury to pain sensitive anal canal mucosa. So what happens? There is longitudinal split. There is longitudinal split in anoderm, and this leads to fissure. Okay, right? So tear is very superficial, it's not very deep, but problem, since these patients have spasm, because of spasm the vascularity is compromised. That's why there is no healing or impaired healing. So because of this spasm, there is no healing or there is impaired healing, right? So that's why in the management, we are supposed to treat what? Constipation, and we have to relax the spasm. See, this fissure in ano is very similar to achalasia cardia. You remember achalasia cardia, in which there is spasm of lower esophageal sphincter, LES, and in fissure in ano there is spasm of IAS, internal anal sphincter. In achalasia cardia, something was not coming inside, means the food was not going to stomach, so patient was having dysphagia. And here, what's the problem? There is difficulty in passing fecal matter, so the things are not going out. Pathophysiology. Now see the management. In achalasia cardia also, we were giving calcium channel blockers for relaxation orally, and here we are applying calcium channel blockers locally. In achalasia cardia also, we were injecting Botox, botulinum toxin, and in fissure in ano also we are injecting Botox. In achalasia cardia, we were going for balloon dilatation, and here we insert finger and go for manual dilatation. In achalasia cardia, we were going for Heller's cardiomyotomy, and here we go for lateral sphincterotomy. So both of these diseases are very similar because their pathophysiology is almost same. So see the clinical features. So this is the patient of Fisher. These patients have severe pain during defecation. So there is severe pain during defecation. We discussed that there is streaking of blood over the stool. So streaking of blood. So there is streaking of blood over stool. Okay. In these patients, since there is spasm of internal anal sphincter and it's very painful to perform digital rectal examination, digital rectal examination is contraindicated. So whenever we are performing examination, we are just going to separate the gluteal fold like this, and when you are going to separate the gluteal fold, you are going to see what? That there is longitudinal split and it starts from anal verge. So what is contraindicated? Here, digital rectal examination, it is contraindicated because it's very painful, and you can see that there is longitudinal split on examination. There is longitudinal split which starts at the anal verge. Now how we are going to manage? First, relaxation techniques. Clear? So we tell the patient to sit in a pan containing lukewarm water, that's known as sitz bath. So what are the general treatment options? We advise for the sitz bath with 1% potassium permanganate. We advise high fiber diet, and we give stool softeners. Means we are treating what? The constipation. Okay. Second, we have to relax the spasm. So first, see the medical management. We give calcium channel blockers. You have to remember the percent. So we give 2% diltiazem gel, and we give nitroglycerin also. Nitrates 0.2% nitroglycerin gel. So 2% diltiazem gel, or we give 0.2% nitroglycerin gel. So this is for local application. Okay. Second, we can inject the Botox. So Botox injection. Third, we can go for manual dilatation. Put the fingers inside and we are going to dilate it. But what is the problem? Certain clinicians or surgeon are going to apply excessive force. Because of that, there is increased risk of incontinence. So this is not done nowadays. What's the name of this procedure? This is known as Lord's procedure. Lord's plication is done for hydrocele, but this manual dilatation, it is known as Lord's procedure. So what's the name of this procedure? This is Lord's procedure. Clear? This is the manual dilatation. Manual dilatation of sphincter. This is obsolete. We are not performing this procedure nowadays. What is the treatment of choice? We have to divide certain fibers of sphincter laterally, and the name of this procedure is Notaras lateral sphincterotomy. So what's the treatment of choice? The name of this procedure is the Notaras lateral sphincterotomy. So this is the Notaras lateral sphincterotomy, which is the treatment of choice. So this is how we treat patients of fissure. Now can you see here, there is collection of dead hair. Can you see? There is collection of dead hair in the postnatal cleft region overlying the coccyx. Can you see? So there is collection of dead hair in the postnatal cleft overlying this coccyx. And what is the name of this condition? This is known as pilonidal sinus. So sinus is having a single opening. Fistula is communication between two epithelium line tract. So here you will notice that there is a single opening. So this is what? Pilonidal sinus. Again, very important topic. It was asked many times in AIIMS. Pilonidal sinus. Clear? So it is characterized by collection of dead hair, where there is collection of dead hair in natal cleft overlying the coccyx. So here you can see this is the coccyx and there is collection of dead hair. It is acquired condition and seen in hairy males. So exclusively seen in hairy males, this is acquired. And you will notice it is more common in army personnel, especially the jeep drivers of army, and that's why it is also known as Jeep's disease. So this is acquired, more common in hairy males, more common in army personnel, especially the jeep drivers, and that's why it is also known as Jeep's disease. Also known as Jeep's disease. Now see the pathophysiology. Superficially or on examination, you can only see one opening in this region. So this is having a single opening. This is the sinus. But see, what is the problem? There is collection of dead hair. So here there is dead hair, and this area is known as pilonidal cyst. So where the collection is there, hair is there, that is pilonidal cyst. There is sinus tract, and this opening is known as sinus. So whenever these patients are coming to us, they have discomfort in the gluteal region. And what else? These patients have serous discharge. So these patients have discomfort and serous discharge. Sometimes when the tract is blocked and it is infected. So if the tract is blocked and infected, then this infection can lead to abscess. So this infection can lead to abscess. So this is the presentation. And if you're performing the examination, you will find this kind of opening over the postnatal cleft region. So see the clinical features. These patients have discomfort in the gluteal region. And there is intermittent serous discharge. So there is intermittent serous discharge. Simple. And whenever there is infection, it can lead to abscess, right? So this is the common location. But you have noticed barbers. In barbers, if you are going to notice, this is one of the common location. What? There is interdigital pilonidal sinus. So pilonidal sinus can be seen in interdigital cleft, especially in the barbers. Other uncommon locations are axilla and umbilicus. So what are the other locations? Interdigital cleft, it can be seen in interdigital cleft region, especially in the barbers, in umbilicus, and in the axilla. Clear? Now, how we are going to treat? It depends on the presentation. Imagine if the patient is having abscess, obviously we have to go for incision and drainage and we have to give antibiotics. And if there is no abscess, in those cases, how we are going to plan the treatment? See, we have to excise the whole tract. So what? You have to excise the whole tract. And whenever you're going to excise this whole tract, what happens? There is a defect which is created. So how you are going to cover this defect? You are going to cover this defect with the flap. So this is how we are going to manage. So see, the management. If the patient is having abscess, clear? So in these patients, we go for incision and drainage plus antibiotics. Incision and drainage plus antibiotics. Otherwise, what is the treatment? Is the surgical excision of tract and followed by flap closure. Flap closure. In exams, they are asking the names of flap. This was asked in AIIMS. That Limburg flap in pilonidal sinus, we use which flap? Limburg flap, which is also known as rhomboid flap. So what are the names of flaps which are used? So here you see this picture. This is rhomboid flap. So after excision, we are closing the defect with rhomboid flap. So this is known as rhomboid flap. And what is the other name of rhomboid flap? It's also known as Limburg's flap. Limburg's flap. There is another flap which is asked in exam. It is Cary-Dakey's flap. So what's the name? It is Cary-Dakey's flap. Clear? And there is a procedure which is performed for patients of pilonidal sinus, and the name of that procedure is the Bascom procedure. Bascom procedure. So this is also asked. It is performed for the patients of pilonidal sinus. Now we are going to discuss carcinoma rectum. So first question, see, what is the most common site of large bowel malignancy? And the most common site of large bowel malignancy is carcinoma rectum. And see the twist, if the question is asked that what is the most common site of colonic malignancy or carcinoma colon, and then the answer will be sigmoid. Okay, so see the first important point. Carcinoma rectum, it's the most common site of large bowel malignancy. Large bowel malignancy. And generally, carcinoma rectum, it is seen in 5th to 6th decade. So it is seen in 5th to 6th decade. Okay, we discussed that in GI malignancies, the malignancies which are having hematogenous spread, what is the most common site of metastasis? It is the liver. So here also there is hematogenous spread. So most common site of metastasis, and most common site of metastasis is liver, right? Like carcinoma colon, in carcinoma rectum also the chemotherapy regimen is same, and that is FOLFOX4. So what's the chemotherapy regimen given here? It's the FOLFOX4. Okay, and we discussed what is FOL. FOL is folinic acid, also known as leucovorin. F, it's 5-fluorouracil, and ox, it's oxaliplatin. Clear? So this was folinic acid, this was folinic acid, and this is also known as leucovorin. F, it is 5-fluorouracil, 5-FU, and ox, this is oxaliplatin. Clear? These are the basic things related to carcinoma rectum. Now see what are the clinical features. Okay, so the most common symptom in carcinoma rectum is the bleeding PR. What is the most common symptom? It's the bleeding PR. Very easy to understand. The most common symptom is bleeding per rectum. Now see what are the other symptoms in carcinoma rectum. So imagine this is the rectum and this is the anal canal, and you can see this is the malignancy. So whenever there is malignancy in the rectum, the most common symptom is bleeding PR. When the patient is sleeping in night, what happens? From this malignancy there is mucus discharge. And what happens in the night? There is bloody discharge. So rectum is full, containing mucus and blood, and whenever this patient gets up in the morning, there is intense desire of defecation and patient is running towards toilet for passing stool. What's the name of this symptom? In early morning, intense desire of defecation. So this is known as early morning diarrhea. So what is the problem? This patient is having early morning diarrhea. Okay, there is intense desire of defecation, and when patient is going to pass the stool, actually it's not the stool, patient is going to pass mucus and blood. So what happens? There is passage of bloody slime. So what is the another characteristic symptom? There is passage of bloody slime. Okay, now see here, some part of rectum is already occupied by the malignancy, and you know that rectum is fecal reservoir. So if the malignancy is going to occupy the rectum, there is little space available. So what will happen? Every 3 to 4 hours, this part of rectum gets filled up with mucus, blood, sometimes stool. So every 3 to 4 hourly, patient is going to pass the stool. So patient is having diarrhea, but it is not true diarrhea, it's fake diarrhea, and this fake diarrhea is known as what? Spurious diarrhea. So another characteristic symptom, every 2 to 3 hours patient is going to pass stool, and what these patients have? Spurious diarrhea. So these are the characteristic symptoms. There is early morning diarrhea, passage of bloody slime, and spurious diarrhea. There is another symptom known as tenesmus. See, whenever this malignancy is specially arising from the lower part of rectum, when patient is going for defecation, even after defecation, patient is having this sensation that still fecal matter is left inside, and during defecation patient is having pain. So what is this symptom? Tenesmus. It is painful defecation with sensation of incomplete evacuation, and it is seen in carcinoma lower part of rectum. So the name of this symptom, this is known as tenesmus. Painful defecation with sensation of incomplete evacuation, and it is seen in malignancies located in lower part of rectum. Malignancies located in lower part of rectum. Now see, whenever in advanced cases the carcinoma rectum is going to involve the sacral plexus posteriorly, and because of involvement of sacral plexus posteriorly, these patients are having what? Backache or sciatica. So what is the cause of backache or sciatica? In advanced cases, patients are having backache or sciatica because of involvement of sacral plexus. Okay, and just like any other malignancy, patients are having anorexia and weight loss. So these patients have anorexia and weight loss. Clear? So these are the clinical features. Now coming to the investigation. Obviously we will go for biopsy, but which investigation is used for taking biopsy? See, it's easy to understand. If you see, what's the length of anal canal? The length of anal canal is 3 centimeter. Okay, and what's the length of rectum? The length of rectum is 14 centimeter. So which instrument you want? Minimal length of that instrument should be 17 centimeter if you want to assess the full rectum. So see, what's the length of proctoscope? We discussed that the length of proctoscope, this is 10 centimeter. What's the length of rigid sigmoidoscope? 25 centimeter. Flexible sigmoidoscope, it is 60 centimeter, and colonoscope, it is 160 centimeter. Okay, so see, proctoscope, length of rigid sigmoidoscope, and length of flexible sigmoidoscope. Rigid sigmoidoscope, that is 25 centimeter, flexible is 60. And what's the length of colonoscope? Colonoscope, it is 160 centimeter. These 4 questions are frequently asked in exam. Clear? So you can see which one is best. So it is the rigid sigmoidoscope. So with the help of rigid sigmoidoscope, we are taking the biopsy. And why we perform rigid sigmoidoscope? Because this can be performed in minor OT by general surgeons. So we go for rigid sigmoidoscopy and we take biopsy. So what is the investigation of choice? Sigmoidoscopy with biopsy. So very easy question. How we make the diagnosis? And the investigation of choice for diagnosis, and that's the sigmoidoscopy. It's the sigmoidoscopy plus biopsy. Simple. By the way, we want to assess the rest of the colon also, because sometimes patients are having synchronous polyps or synchronous malignancies. Now see, what is synchronous and what is metachronous malignancy or lesion? Synchronous means if the tumor is detected within 6 months after diagnosis of primary tumor. So if some lesion is detected within 6 months of diagnosis of primary tumor, that is synchronous, and if it is detected after 6 months, it is metachronous. So that's why we go for colonoscopy. So apart from sigmoidoscopy with biopsy, we have to perform colonoscopy. Why? To assess synchronous polyp or malignancy. So we want to rule out synchronous polyp or malignancy which might be present in the colon. So the diagnosis is done. Now we go for the staging. Okay, so how we are going to stage? We discussed that in carcinoma esophagus also, the best investigation for staging, it was endoscopic ultrasound. So for esophagus we were performing endoscopic ultrasound. That's why in carcinoma rectum we are performing transrectal ultrasound. So what we are performing? Transrectal ultrasound. So here, investigation of choice for T staging. For T staging, this is the transrectal ultrasound. Now see how it's done. This is the rectum and you are going to insert the probe inside, and what this kind of appearance will be there. Clear? Now see, if the tumor is like this, these are 5 layers. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So if you see 1, 3, 5 is hyperechoic, 2 and 4 are hypoechoic. So whenever some tumor is going to involve the layer, immediately you will get to know that which layer is involved. So this is best for T staging and this is transrectal ultrasound. Okay, now see, you know that the sensitivity of ultrasound is maximum when the distance between organ and probe is minimum. Sensitivity of ultrasound is maximum when the distance between probe and organ is minimum. And if you keep increasing the distance between organ and probe, its sensitivity decreases. So now see, whenever this probe is in the rectum and there is distantly lying nerve, vessels and lymph nodes. So if there is distantly lying nerve, vessels and lymph node, this truss is not going to differentiate lymph node from distantly lying nerve or vessels. So that's why truss is not very sensitive for lymph node staging. So for lymph node staging, what is the best investigation or investigation of choice? So investigation of choice for lymph node staging, and this is MRI. We use special type of MRI, and what's that? It's known as endorectal. In this case, it is known as endorectal coil MRI. In short, it's known as echo MRI. And if you talk about overall staging, what is the best investigation? So investigation of choice for staging overall. Okay, so we have to choose what? MRI. Clear? Now see, anywhere where there is overcrowding of soft tissues like nerves, vessels, muscles, in those cases, MRI is investigation of choice. See, in head and neck malignancies and in pelvic malignancies, there is overcrowding of nerves, vessels, muscles, soft tissues. So whenever there is overcrowding of soft tissues, the investigation of choice for staging is MRI. That's why for head and neck malignancies like oral cavity, salivary gland tumor, brain tumors, so for head and neck malignancies, investigation of choice for staging is MRI. And for pelvic malignancies like carcinoma rectum, carcinoma bladder, carcinoma prostate, investigation of choice for staging is MRI. Okay. So another important point related to MRI, that MRI is investigation of choice for staging of head and neck malignancies. Clear? So head and neck malignancies, and what else? Pelvic malignancies like carcinoma rectum, carcinoma bladder, carcinoma prostate. So staging is done. Now coming to the treatment. 8th AJCC TNM classification of colon and carcinoma rectum is same, and we discussed that in chapter of large intestine. Okay, so now see, what are the principles of treatment? Okay, now if the patient is having stage 1 malignancy, what is sufficient? For stage 1, surgical excision is sufficient, right? But if patient is having stage 2, stage 3, stage 4 malignancies, in these cases, since the malignancy is advanced and there is little space in the pelvis, that's why we want to go for down staging of the tumor. So in stage 2, in stage 3 and in stage 4, we downstage the tumor by neoadjuvant chemoradiation. And in stage 2 and 3, after neoadjuvant chemoradiation, we perform the surgical resection. And in stage 4, if it's possible to perform the resection, we can go for surgical resection or we can go for palliation. Okay. So in stage 1, what we do, we go for surgical resection of malignancy. And in stage 2 and stage 3, we go for neoadjuvant chemoradiation. Neoadjuvant chemoradiation, okay, followed by surgical resection, right? And what happens in stage 4? In stage 4 also, we go for neoadjuvant chemoradiation followed by surgery, if possible, or palliation. Surgery or palliation. So this is how we perform the treatment of carcinoma rectum. Now see, in patients of carcinoma rectum, we go for total mesorectal excision. Total mesorectal excision. So it was given by Bill Heald. How we perform total mesorectal excision? Have a look. Now see this diagram. Here you can see this is the tumor and you can see this is the mesorectum. right? So whenever we are removing the tumor, carcinoma rectum, we have to remove the surrounding tissue. Can you see? And what is the excision line? This is the line of excision. So this excision is done till the plane between mesorectum and there is presacral fascia. So this excision of surrounding tissue is done up to the plane between mesorectum and presacral fascia, and this is known as Heald's holy plane, right? So what we do in total mesorectal excision, here there is excision of surrounding tissue, excision of surrounding tissues up to the Heald's holy plane, up to the Heald's holy plane. Okay, and what is this Heald's holy plane? This is a plane between mesorectum and presacral fascia. So what's this Heald's holy plane? It's a plane between mesorectum and presacral fascia. Clear? So this is total mesorectal excision which we perform in the patients of carcinoma rectum. This is one concept. So see the second concept. So whenever the malignancy is in the rectum, we have to take 5 cm proximal and 2 cm distal margin. So generally we discuss that in GI malignancies we are supposed to take 5 cm margin. What are the exceptions? Exception is esophagus, where we take 10 cm margin, and the distal rectum, where we take 2 cm margin. Okay, so see, imagine that this is the anal canal. What's the length? It is 3 cm. And how much margin should be taken distally? We are supposed to take 2 cm margin distally. Clear? So if any malignancy which is located more than 5 cm above anal verge, you can see this is anal verge. So if a malignancy is located more than 5 cm above anal verge, we have sufficient margin and we can take 2 cm distal margin. So we can go for LAR. LAR means low anterior resection. And in that case, we can go for rectoanal anastomosis. Clear? But if the malignancy is located at or below 5 cm from the anal verge, in that case we don't have sufficient margin, and in those cases we have to go for APR. So two situations: when the malignancy is located more than 5 cm above anal verge, what is sufficient? In these patients we go for low anterior resection. And if the malignancy is located at or below 5 cm, at or below 5 cm from anal verge. Clear? So in these cases we go for APR. And what is the full form of APR? Abdominoperineal resection. And what is the other name of APR? It is known as Miles procedure. So we can go for abdominoperineal resection. This is known as Miles procedure. Clear? And what is done in abdominoperineal resection? So here we have to remove the whole anal canal, the whole rectum, and the patient is going to have a permanent colostomy. So these are the kind of treatment options for patients of carcinoma rectum. Now we are going to discuss carcinoma anal canal. Okay, and the carcinoma anal canal is totally different from the malignancies of GIT. See, we discussed that in GIT mainly there is adenocarcinoma because the lining is columnar epithelium. In anal canal, what is the lining? The lining epithelium is squamous. So what is the most common type of malignancy? Squamous cell carcinoma. 1. Second, we discussed that generally squamous cell carcinoma is more common in low socioeconomic status. So in this case, you will notice that risk factors will be revolving around low socioeconomic status. Third, you know that human papilloma virus HPV infection is a risk factor for squamous cell carcinoma. So here also HPV is a risk factor. Fourth, carcinoma anal canal. The anal canal venous drainage goes into systemic circulation, and via systemic circulation, via inferior vena cava, it goes to right atrium, right ventricle, and then lungs. So since it is having hematogenous spread, what is the most common site of metastasis? It is lungs. In GIT we discussed it was liver, but here it's the lungs. So these are the differences. Okay, so first, what's the most common type of malignancy? So the most common type, it is squamous cell carcinoma, followed by basal cell carcinoma, followed by malignant melanoma. Second important point, what's the most common site of metastasis? And the most common site of metastasis, it's the lungs. It's the lungs. Another important point, you know that in perineal malignancies, which lymph node is most commonly involved? Perineal malignancies, which include carcinoma anal canal, carcinoma penis, carcinoma scrotum. So in all these cases, the most commonly involved group of lymph node is inguinal. So here also, most commonly involved group of lymph node is inguinal. Clear? So most commonly involved group of lymph node, like any other perineal malignancy, and it's the inguinal lymph node. Okay, now see the risk factors. Risk factors are evolving around low socioeconomic status. Clear? So see the risk factors: smoking, HPV infection. What are the strain having maximum risk of malignancies? 16, 18, 31, 33. So it is 16, 18, 31, 33. In which patients there is increased risk of HPV infection? The people who are having multiple partners. So if the patient is having multiple partners, HIV positive patients, or immunocompromised. So immunocompromised patients or HIV positive patients, and the patients having anal receptive intercourse. Anal receptive intercourse means passive partners. Clear? So these are the risk factors for carcinoma anal canal. Now see the clinical features. It is very easy to understand. If you see, this is the anal canal. Okay, so what happens initially, the malignancy is inside the anal canal, and whenever this malignancy is inside the anal canal, what is the symptom? Patient is having bleeding PR. Over a period of time, you will notice that this malignancy or part of malignancy comes out. When this part of malignancy comes out, now the patient will be having foul smelling discharge. Okay, in advanced malignancies, if it is going anteriorly, it can involve what? Bladder. It can involve vagina. So whenever there is involvement of bladder and vagina, there can be fistula. And whenever it is going to involve the sphincters, if there is involvement of sphincters, what will happen? These patients might have incontinence. So see the clinical features. These patients have bleeding PR and bleeding per rectum. This is the most common symptom. What are the other symptoms? There is foul smelling discharge. Foul smelling discharge. If there is involvement of bladder or vagina. So in these cases, what's the problem? There is formation of fistula. One problem, whenever there is involvement of sphincters, there is incontinence. So what? If there is involvement of sphincters, sphincter involvement, it can lead to incontinence. Clear? These patients might have what? Alteration of bowel habit. In advanced malignancies, there is alteration of bowel habit. Clear? So whenever these symptoms are there, patient is having fistula, incontinence, alteration of bowel habit, these are suggestive of ominous symptoms. So these are ominous symptoms. It means malignancy is advanced. And we discussed what is the most common site of metastasis. It is lungs, and most commonly involved group of lymph nodes. It's the inguinal lymph node. Length of anal canal is 3 centimeter. So which instrument is sufficient to visualize the anal canal? Proctoscope. And we visualize the anal canal and we take the biopsy. So how we are going to make the diagnosis? Diagnosis, investigation of choice for diagnosis, and this is the proctoscopy with biopsy. It's proctoscopy plus biopsy. Now see the 8th AJCC TNM classification of carcinoma anal canal. So 8th AJCC TNM classification of carcinoma anal canal, right? TIS, first is TIS. TIS is also known as carcinoma in situ. It is also known as carcinoma in situ. And carcinoma in situ in anal canal is known as Bowen's disease. This is known as Bowen's disease. And this is also known as anal intraepithelial neoplasia type 1 to type 3. Like cervical intraepithelial neoplasia, that is CIN. Here it is AIN, anal intraepithelial neoplasia. If you see the T staging, it is very similar to CA breast. So in CA breast, T1 was the size of tumor up to 2 centimeter. So here also up to 2. T2 more than 2 to 5 and T3 more than 5 centimeter. And in T4 there was involvement of adjacent structures. So T1 to T4 is almost similar like carcinoma breast. Easy to remember. So see T1 when the size of tumor is up to 2 centimeter. T2, T3, T4. In T2 the size of tumor is more than 2 to 5 centimeter, and in T3 it is more than 5 centimeter. In T4 there is involvement of adjacent structures. So what are the adjacent structures? Like vagina, urethra, bladder. So here there is involvement of adjacent structures. Clear? Like vagina, urethra and bladder. Clear? So this is T staging. Now see the lymph node staging. Lymph node staging is divided into N1A, N1B, N1C. So here you can see the lymph node staging. N1A, in N1A there is metastasis to inguinal, mesorectal and or internal iliac lymph node. And whenever there is involvement of external iliac lymph node, this is included in N1B. Apart from external iliac lymph node, if there is involvement of inguinal, mesorectal and or internal iliac, then it becomes N1C. Okay, and the metastasis is easiest. M0, no metastasis. So in M0 there is no metastasis, and in M1 there is distant metastasis. M0 no metastasis, and in M1 there is distant metastasis. This is the TNM classification. Now coming to the treatment. The treatment question was asked minimum 100 to 200 times. And what is the question? What is the treatment of choice for carcinoma anal canal? And it's the Nigro regimen, and that includes chemoradiation. So see the treatment of carcinoma anal canal and the treatment of choice, it's Nigro regimen. Famous question. And what is this Nigro regimen? This is chemoradiation. So in this we give chemotherapy followed by radiation. Okay, so which chemotherapy agent? We give 5-fluorouracil plus mitomycin C. At some centers at the place of mitomycin C, cisplatin is also given. So it is 5-fluorouracil plus mitomycin C followed by radiation or radiotherapy. So chemotherapy agent 5-fluorouracil plus mitomycin C followed by radiotherapy. When we give chemoradiation, you can't believe, tumor disappears. So generally after 4 to 6 weeks we go for check biopsy, and on check biopsy tumor disappears. Imagine if there is persistent tumor persists on the check biopsy. So on after chemoradiation, if there is no response and tumor still persists, in that case we go for abdominoperineal resection, which is also known as Miles procedure. So this is how we manage carcinoma anal canal, and this is all about rectum and anal canal.